In three small villages nestled in the mountains of western Sicily, 15 people out of every 10,000 have already celebrated their 100th birthday. The national average in Italy typically ranges between 2 and 3. Consequently, this specific patch of high country possesses more than 6 times the number of centenarians it statistically should. And there is an even stranger figure hidden beneath that one. Almost as many of these 100-year-olds are men as they are women. Everywhere else on the planet, women outlive men by a significant margin. Up there, in the Sicily Mountains, that gap nearly closes. A doctor in Palermo dedicated a large portion of his life to understanding why. His name is Calogero Caruso. He is an immunologist, a man who investigates how the body's defenses age, and he traveled into those mountain villages with his team to measure these elderly people the way you would measure a patient. Blood pressure, memory, heart. And what he discovered unsettled the standard story we tell about growing old. These centenarians were not merely alive, they were thriving. Their blood chemistry appeared closer to that of young adults than to that of the average 70-year-old living in a city. Their minds remained clear. Most displayed no sign of dementia, no sign of the diseases we treat as the inevitable cargo of old age. They were thin, but not frail. They moved. And almost none of them had ever sat in a doctor's waiting room for a chronic illness because they simply did not have one. So Caruso did what a good scientist does. He compared them to people who shared their blood and their genes, but not their lives. He looked at relatives who had moved down to Palermo, to the city, and lived a modern life. Those relatives did not live as long, and they did not stay as healthy. Same family, different table, which indicated to him that whatever was protecting these old men and women was not hiding in their DNA. It was on their plates every single day. And when he broke the diet down, searching for the thing that set the mountain people apart from the city people, one item kept rising to the top. One thing they ate, or rather drank, every day of their lives in amounts that would shock a modern nutritionist. Extra virgin olive oil, not as a garnish, not a careful teaspoon. They poured it, raw, green, peppery, pressed from their own trees, over bread, over beans, over greens, over everything. It was not a condiment to them, it was the meal's foundation. Now you've heard that olive oil is healthy, everyone has. But I want to take you past the slogan because the way these centenarians used it and the reason it worked is not what most people think. The benefit is not really about the fat. It is about 3 things the oil does, quietly every time it touches a plate. And once you understand them, you will see why the mountain people lived, and the city people, eating the same oil, but in different amounts in different company, did not get the same protection. The first thing the oil does is bitter. That sharp, peppery bite at the back of your throat when you taste a good raw oil, the one that almost makes you cough, that is not a flaw. That is a family of compounds called polyphenols, and the strongest one in a fresh, unrefined oil is called oleuropein. It is the same bitter molecule that makes a raw olive inedible off the tree. Refined supermarket oils have most of it stripped out, which is why they taste smooth and bland. The mountain oil was rough and bitter and alive with it. Oleuropein does something remarkable inside a cell. It nudges the body into a state it normally only reaches during fasting. It gently switches on the cell's own cleaning and recycling machinery, the process where a cell breaks down its worn-out parts and rebuilds them fresh. Scientists call that machinery autophagy. It is one of the deepest repair systems we have, and it slows down as we age. A daily dose of bitter polyphenols keeps nudging it back on. The mountain people were, in a sense, getting a faint echo of fasting's benefits with every bitter spoonful on top of a full meal. So here is the first thing to take from this. The bitterness is the medicine. When you buy olive oil, do not run from the peppery, throat-catching ones. Chase them. A smooth, buttery oil has very little European left. Look for words like early harvest, unfiltered, or a harvest date on the bottle. And when you taste it raw, you want that cough. That bite is the thing Caruso's centenarians were swallowing every day. The second thing the oil does is harder to see, and it has to do not with the oil itself, but with what it does to everything else on the plate. When you pour real olive oil over a meal of bread or beans or vegetables, It slows the whole thing down. The fat coats the food in the stomach, and the sugars in that meal release into your blood slowly in a gentle tide instead of a sharp spike. This matters more than almost anything. And it is the part Caruso pointed to directly. He found that the mountain diet had a low glycemic index. The bread, the beans, the grains, all of it released its energy slowly. And a body that never gets the sharp sugar spike never has to fire off the sharp flood of insulin to deal with it. Over a lifetime, that calm, low, steady pattern keeps the whole system that controls blood sugar and growth running gently instead of grinding it down. The oil was the brake. Poured over every meal, it kept the mountain people off the blood sugar roller coaster their whole lives. You can borrow that exact mechanism tomorrow. It does not require Sicilian oil or Sicilian beans. It requires a habit. Pour real olive oil over your carbohydrates, not next to them. Over the bread, over the potato, over the rice. Stir it through. The fat genuinely blunts the sugar spike of that meal, and you will feel it as steadier energy and less of that heavy, sleepy crash an hour after eating. The centenarians did this without knowing the chemistry. They just knew the oil made the bread sit right. The third thing is the company the oil kept. And this is where Caruso's findings turn from interesting to important, because the oil was never poured over meat. It was poured over plants. The mountain diet was strikingly low in animal protein. Meat appeared rarely. A little cheese here, an egg there, fish on the coast, but less so up in the hills. The bulk of every day was beans, grains, vegetables, wild greens, and the oil that tied them together. And Caruso believes the low animal protein is not a footnote. It is central. When you eat a great deal of animal protein day after day, you keep a growth signal in your body switched high. That signal is useful when you are young in building a body. But kept high for decades, it appears to speed the wear of aging and feed the diseases of old age. The mountain people, eating little animal protein, kept that growth signal low. Their bodies spent less time in build mode and more time in maintain and repair mode. Combined with the bitter oil nudging their cells to clean themselves, they were living biologically in a gentler gear than the rest of us. This is the deepest lesson from the Sicily Mountains, and it runs against almost everything modern food culture shouts at us. We are told, especially as we get older, to load up on protein and to mean meat when we say it. These centenarians did close to the opposite. They built their days on plants and oil, kept meat to the margins, and they did not just survive into their hundreds. They arrived there sharp and upright and free of the illnesses we assume are simply the price of age. Let me be careful and honest here because it matters. Caruso did not find one magic food. No real scientist would claim that. What he found was a pattern, and within that pattern, one daily habit stood out as the clearest marker dividing the long-lived mountain people from their shorter-lived city relatives. And that habit was the daily flood of raw, bitter, polyphenol-rich olive oil poured over a plate of plants. The oil is the thread, but the cloth is the whole way of eating, and you cannot have the thread without the cloth. So what did the cloth look like day to day? It was humble. A breakfast of bread, maybe rubbed with tomato, drizzled heavily with oil. A midday plate built around legumes, often a thick puree of dried fava or chickpeas the old Sicilians call macu, again with oil poured over the top, served with whatever greens were in season. Wild greens were everywhere, gathered from the hillsides. Bitter ones like borage and wild chard, cooked simply and dressed with, you guessed it, more oil, bread to push it all together. Water and a little local wine with the evening meal. That was the rhythm. Plants, beans, greens, bread, and oil over all of it every day for 100 years. Come back for a moment to that strange second number, the one about the men. Almost as many men as women reach 100 up in those mountains, when everywhere else women win that race by a mile. Caruso finds this telling. Men as a rule age harder and faster, and their hearts and arteries usually give out earlier. A diet that protects men this well, that closes a gap biology almost never closes, is a diet doing something powerful at the level of the blood vessels and the slow fire of inflammation. The oil in the plants were not gently helping the people most likely to live long anyway. They were rescuing the ones who, by every statistic, should have died first. That is how strong the effect on the plate appears to be. There is a quiet dignity in how little it cost. These were not wealthy people. The Sicily Mountains were poor, hard farming country. The diet was not a choice made from a menu of options. It was what the land gave and what their grandmothers had always cooked. And it turned out to be, almost by accident, one of the healthiest patterns of eating ever measured in a human population. The poverty was part of the protection. No money for much meat meant a lifetime of low animal protein. No money for processed food meant a lifetime of slow, whole, real meals. What the modern world sells as deprivation, their bodies experienced as medicine. Now think about the relatives who moved to Palermo because they are the most useful part of this whole story. They carried the same genes down the mountain. But in the city, the oil became a careful drizzle instead of a flood. The meat came more often because now it was affordable and everywhere. The bread became the soft white kind that spikes blood sugar fast. The greens off the hillside disappeared. And with those changes, the protection faded. Their lifespans shortened toward the ordinary. It was not their blood that failed them, it was the change of table. That is the most hopeful thing I can tell you, and the most demanding. Hopeful because it means the protection is not locked away in some rare Sicilian gene you were not born with. It is in the pattern, and the pattern is portable. Demanding because it means you actually have to live it, not just buy a nice bottle of oil and keep eating the way you always have. There is one more layer to this, and it is the layer Caruso understands better than almost anyone because it is his life's field. He is an immunologist. He spends his days studying the aging of the immune system. And when his team looked at the immune profiles of these mountain centenarians, they found something that should not have been there. Their immune systems looked young. As we age, most of us develop a slow, simmering, low-grade inflammation throughout the body. It has no symptoms you can feel. There is no fever, no swelling you can point to, but it is there in the blood year after year, a quiet smolder. Scientists have given it a name that captures it perfectly: inflammaging, the inflammation of aging. And that smolder is now understood to be one of the engines underneath nearly every disease of old age: the heart disease, the failing memory, the stiff joints, the fragile arteries. It is the slow fire that ages us from the inside. The Sicily centenarians had remarkably little of it. Their blood ran cool, and Caruso traces a large part of that back, again, to the plate. The polyphenols in the bitter oil, the fiber, and the plant compounds in all those beans and wild greens, they actively damp inflammation. They are, in the most literal sense, anti-inflammatory. Not as a pill, but as a daily diet, where the modern Western plate, heavy in meat and refined starch and industrial fat, gently feeds the fire, the mountain plate gently puts it out. Every single day, 3 times a day, for a century, these people were eating food that cooled the slow fire of aging instead of feeding it. And much of that cooling happens in a place you might not expect: the gut. When you eat the kind of plant fiber and polyphenols the mountain diet was drenched in, you are not really feeding only yourself. You are feeding the trillions of bacteria living in your colon. A diet rich in plants and oil polyphenols grows the kinds of bacteria that produce calming, protective compounds and that keep the wall of the gut tight and sealed. A diet of meat and refined food grows a different, harsher crowd and lets the gut wall grow leaky, which lets fragments of bacteria slip into the blood and stoke that very inflammation we are trying to avoid. The bitter oil and the beans were tending a garden inside these people, and the garden, in turn, kept their whole bodies calm. This is why I keep saying the oil is the thread, but the plants are the cloth. Pour the bitter oil over a steak, and you lose most of it. Pour it over a bowl of beans and greens, and you have the whole Sicily mechanism in a single dish. The centenarians never separated the two because their grandmothers never separated them. The oil and the plants arrived together, always, and that pairing is the quiet genius of the whole thing. Let me take you for a moment to one village in particular because it puts a face on the numbers: Caltabellotta, a town of stone houses stacked up a steep hillside in the province of Agrigento in the heart of the Sicily range. It is the kind of place where the streets are too narrow and too steep for much driving. So the old people walk them up and down every day as they have their whole lives. Researchers keep returning to Caltabulata because for its size, it produces extraordinary numbers of healthy centenarians, and it has become one of the clearest small examples of a longevity zone emerging anywhere in the Mediterranean. What strikes the people who go there is not some exotic secret, it is the ordinariness of it. An old man in his late 90s tends a small garden of beans and greens and tomatoes. He presses oil from his own few trees. He walks the steep lane to the square in the morning and back in the evening. He eats what he grows dressed in his own oil with bread and a little wine and meat only on a Sunday or a saint's day. He is not on a regimen. He is simply living the only way his village has ever known how to live. And that ordinary life, repeated across a town and across a century, produces some of the healthiest old age on the planet. There is no trick here. No supplement they were taking that you are missing. No secret the longevity industry is hiding from you. The whole of it is bitter green oil poured over plants, little meat, real food, daily movement up a hill, and time. It is almost insultingly simple, and that simplicity is exactly why it is so hard for the modern world to sell, and so easy for you to copy. So let me give you the one thing to do tomorrow, because that is how change actually happens. With one thing and not 10. Buy a real extra virgin olive oil, the bitter, peppery, early harvest kind that makes you cough a little. And tomorrow, instead of saving it for a salad, pour it generously over your main carbohydrate at lunch, over the bread or the beans or the grain, and skip the meat at that meal in favor of the plants underneath the oil. One meal. Bitter oil poured over plants, no meat. That single plate is the Sicily Mountains in miniature, and it carries all three of the things Caruso found. The polyphenols that clean your cells, the fat that calms your blood sugar, and the low animal protein that keeps your body in its gentle gear. Do that one meal often enough, and it stops being a plan and becomes a habit, and the habit is the whole thing. The centenarians of the Sicily Mountains were not following a diet. They had no word for it. They were simply eating the way their mountains had always fed them, pouring the green oil over the beans the way their mothers did, living slow in a gentle gear without ever naming it. A Palermo doctor spent his life measuring them and came away with a finding so simple, it almost sounds too plain to be true. Eat plants. Pour the bitter oil over them. Keep the meat to the edges. And the body, given that, can carry you a very long way. If this story changed the way you look at the simple ingredients in your kitchen, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the history and the science that the modern world often overlooks. Let's cultivate a healthier future together. The next treasure of longevity will be revealed soon,